by Fabian Bock, which is from DHL Group. He's the director, data science, and he will drive us through the presentation called From Idea to Solution with Natural Language Processing and Generative AI. So please join me to welcome Fabian. Thank you. Also, all yours.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Also from my side, I'm Fabian from DHL, a central team in our group working on different aspects of analytics, AI, Gen AI. And I want to share with you our approach, how we move from a national idea to a solution in the field of Gen AI and also natural language processing. Before I start with the content, I have two short questions to you. The first question for you is, who of you is currently working on any application around the field of Gen AI? Please just raise your hand. Many of you, I see a lot of hands now. Who of you has an application in production already in the field of Gen AI? I see 6, 7 hands, less. So I want to share with you how we address it to bring it finally also into production with Gen AI, but also with the longer history of natural language processing. Before I start with the content shortly, I will give you an introduction about myself, but also about DHL and NLP and Gen AI. I guess I can keep it short after the introductions we had before already. I have a technical background in physics, in geoinformatics, and work already in the field of data science since more than 10 years in different roles. Since around 6 years, I'm now working for DHL. I started in a very technical role, but moved then more and more into a management role, all the time focusing on this field of processing text data, which in the past we called it natural language processing, using a lot of unstructured text data. And now since a year, there is this buzz around Gen AI, so now I'm also working a lot in this field. And I want to share with you less use cases, but rather lessons learned from this journey when we have new ideas in this field of NLP and Gen AI, how we bring them into production, and what I would now do differently than maybe a few years ago in the one or the other project. When we talk about DHL, some of you might rather know what DHL or Deutsche Post does in Germany, so delivering parcels, delivering letters, but this is only a part of the business. There is also a big business internationally. We have colleagues, nearly 600,000 of colleagues around the globe, working on sending express shipments, up to 1 million a day, but also sending containers of goods around the world, and also running warehouses and terminals. And when we talk about Gen AI, I think we saw this morning already a very similar illustration. I will just keep it short, that NLP, Gen AI have a very similar field, that we are working with text data. NLP can be also classical machine learning. Gen AI can also generate more than text. It can generate images, it can generate videos, but both have a large intersect. I just want to only share with you one example illustrating how fast this field of generative AI is evolving. On the left, you see an image from back then state-of-the-art image generation model, March 2022. And with exactly the same prompt, just 1 year later, you can see that it just looks much more natural, much more realistic, and here even you maybe couldn't recognize that this is artificially generated and not a real photo. Both had exactly the same prompt, asking for a red-haired woman wearing sunglasses standing in front of the Statue of Liberty. Now let's come to our approach, how we run projects starting from the POC, from idea over POC to finally bringing it into production. We have in total 4 stages. I want to walk you through and share for all of the stages with you some of the best practices and lessons learned. Starting from the very left, the ideation phase, then moving over to the POC to build a first prototype, a first MVP, before we then have a more detailed implementation phase, where you see here there is a cycle. This cycle has the meaning that not always after POC you directly go to the implementation phase, but it could also happen that you identify during the POC that you have to change the scope and you might spend more time in this POC phase before you then move towards the implementation. Also then, for the last part, when we are already live with our project, there is a cycle again because we cannot just say, okay, we have just bought a machine, we have it in production, now it is running. But in this field of machine learning and generative AI, it is important to always have a look at, is this model still working well? Does the data change? Does this usage behavior change? And keep it up to date. I have only one exemplary project I want to share with you, and you can keep it in mind when we, in the further part, move along this journey. This is an example where we also went through all these steps. And let's imagine in your company, you have different cases where there are a lot of texts coming in. It could be emails, IT tickets, and there are dispatchers who need to decide which team needs to address it. In our case, we have, for example, for our IT department, we have more than 1,000 of these teams who have to handle these IT tickets. And it's not a trivial task to decide for one IT ticket who of these teams has to handle it. But also for incoming emails, you can imagine that customers or contract partners have all different kind of requests via email, and having there an automated or semi-automated approach can help to be not only cheaper, that you need to spend less time on handling these requests, but also you can be faster if not this email is first waiting in a queue for several hours, but it automatically, within a second, can be sent to the correct team. Now let's have a look at our journey. Starting with the ideation phase, we had today already several talks on different ways how you can do ideation. I will keep it short on that part. So what also happens to us often, it is not we run ideation workshops, but colleagues from the different parts of the company just come to us, say, hey, I have an idea, could we discuss it? And first, we have just an informal call, let's say half an hour, talking about what is the situation, is it in all feasible to use AI to solve that problem? But then we jump into a structured scoping workshop. In such workshops, and I think this is again similar to what we have seen this morning, addressing key questions. Sorry, the font is a bit small. We start with, we want to identify what is the problem, what do you want to achieve, before we then also compare to what we have already. I think in most of the cases, you have already an approach in place, you have already some baseline, and you want to improve it. You want to make it better, faster, cheaper. And also we identify what is the end product, how we want to also integrate it in the end. Very important, sometimes it's forgotten, to define upfront when such an activity is successful. It could be that from a machine learning perspective, you think, okay, we are satisfied with the result. But it could be then on the other side, business partners are then saying, okay, we want to achieve 99%. Having this clear in the beginning helps a lot to move forward. And finally, also, it is important upfront to align on, is all the data already available? Maybe you need to start collecting the data or make the data accessible before you can proceed with a proof of concept, where we have a clear contracting where we align on what is part of this proof of concept and what is clearly out of scope. And one lesson learned in this field of handling with text data is that most of these approaches don't achieve 100%. They even don't come close to 100%. Maybe it is 70%, 80%. But the point is, also humans do not achieve this performance. We had one project around classification of job postings. Humans should, or in the process, people classified what is the career level, they called it, the level of seniority of job postings into 15 different levels, from very entry level to the top executives. And only if you ask two people, in only 30% they were agreeing. Of course, they cannot expect that our machine is doing anything better than this 30%. So that's why it is important when you start such a project that you also measure what is the human performance, for example, with this inter-rater reliability, that you ask two people to do the same job, but also manage the expectations of the stakeholders, that they do not expect that you achieve 100%, but maybe achieve a similar performance as the people who do the job currently. Now, when we move on with the proof of concept, we have now a clear contract of what we want to do, and we have the clear principles that we want to follow. And one key aspect there is that we take a lot of time to first understand the data and the business challenge. I've seen that in projects where you too early start to build something without fully understanding the data, without fully understanding the business challenge, you have something there, but it is not really fitting the need of your project partner. That's why we also say we run these proof of concepts iteratively, that we don't say, okay, now we started and in 2 months we come back and this is what we deliver, but we early deliver a baseline to the colleagues, asking them, is this what you need, or were you expecting something completely different? And finally, what is really important, that we do not build and then we build it a bit better and a bit better again, but we have a clear time box. We say typically 2 months, sometimes even in 1 month, we want to be done with this proof of concept. And after that, you have a clear cut, and then you can decide how you want to continue. Maybe you need more time, you do a second POC, but usually after this time, we already agree on how we continue to bring it into the implementation phase. Some lessons learned in this POC phase are, first, it helps a lot to build early demonstrators, especially now in the time of Gen AI. In the past, we were rather building a proof of concept and told the business, okay, we achieved 80% accuracy, it looks like this, some statistics, but it helps a lot to engage the stakeholders by showing them a really simple front end where they maybe just want to enter their own text and they are really then more convinced, okay, this is something that can help me when we move forward with it. And of course, you can start already early with collecting user feedback. So at that point in time, you can already give it to a few of the stakeholders and they can give you feedback on, this is already good enough and these are the parts you have to improve on. Second part, what helped us a lot to be fast in these POCs, that we have a standardized approach how we run projects. So we have this framework, we know we have a standard template how we implement, like our project with a Python code, with a GitHub template and so on. So it's not every project, again, we have to discuss how we start a project, but it is clear for the project team how we deliver it, in what environment, and also how, for example, we build then the demonstrator. Also, it has the second advantage that if you later on for the implementation phase hand it over to another team, it is built on the same standard, so people are already aware of the approach and the setup. And finally, I think it's important that in the POC phase, you early start already discussions with your legal colleagues. I've been in several discussions, especially around text data, where personal data is often involved, discussing several months about what are we allowed, what do we need to consider, where maybe we need user consent. And sometimes it's even that design decisions are based on the legal advice, that we say, okay, this feature we shouldn't do, this feature we can do. So if you're too fast with your implementation, then you have maybe built something which is then not advised to really do so. Now let's move on to the implementation phase. There, for us, it is always the question, how can we integrate what we have built into the systems of our colleagues? Whether it's in finance, in HR, all of them, they have already their established systems, and our AI part needs to be fit into it. And there we made the experience that API is the way to go usually. We had projects where we delivered to them Python code. They integrated the Python code. Or we had access to their environment. Always it was more complicated than building an API where there's a clear separation. This is our part. Also later on, we then can take over the support just of that part, while the other part is still clearly on the business side. Also, this helps to scale it. If you have then a high demand on your API, you can have spin up more machines to serve all the demands to the API, which is not as easily possible if you have it in an isolated environment. The second point here is that it is important to early think about how you want to test it before moving to production. We've seen in some projects we were fast in building 90%, but for the last 10%, we started for every change again to do all the tests which were too often manual, but it helped us then in later projects to have a well-defined test approach, also an automated approach, that you then, if you do just some changes to it, you run these tests and within a short time you can have the next release again. Also, what we saw in one project, it is that it is important that the data set you had before, which is maybe an isolated data set, you took just the data of last year, you trained your machine learning model, and okay, I have 90% accuracy. This is different when you have a live system. Like every day there might be a new IT failure, and of course our machine learning model has never seen that before. So it would be wrong to just say, okay, we have this 90% accuracy, all fine. But we have to think about how does our machine learning approach perform also under real conditions. And this is important to have early in mind before you then really go to production. I've seen also in other parts, projects where they went live with it, and then a week later they took it off again because in production suddenly from 90% it fell down to 30%. And this is something you don't want to have. And finally, it is important that you keep your model simple. And I've seen it in several parts, and I have listed down 3 reasons why it doesn't help to improve, because sometimes you just make the accuracy 1-2% better again, and seldom it was that one change then made this big jump to have the perfect solution. So it was often just waste of time. It was just this wish, oh, we do just this one experiment more, and then it will be much better again. Also, every custom implementation you build on top is much harder to maintain. So 6 years ago, when I started, I implemented something where I thought, oh, cool, I can just make it 1 or 2% better. In the end, the business didn't need it, but we kept it in there because it was nice to have it there. But every time when we handed it over to new colleagues, it was just more difficult for them to understand this customized setup. So having it simple also makes it easier to keep it alive later on. And finally, what we also heard multiple times already, this field of Gen AI is moving that fast that what you build now and maybe fine-tune over a lot of time, maybe in a year or two, it's not needed anymore. Just the market has evolved that fast. So better don't spend the time on that. And finally, what helped us a lot on design decisions is to define a cost model, meaning that sometimes we have to decide model A is having the better precision, the other is having the better recall. The one is having a better automation rate, the other. So we asked the business and we found out usually the business is overwhelmed by such a decision because they don't clearly know what is better. So we defined, okay, if an email is sent to the wrong team, it costs you, let's say, €1. If somebody handles it directly manual, it is €2. Whatever, but having this cost model, you can directly decide, okay, this is our optimal approach to set up the thresholds. Now let's come to the last part on bringing now what we have implemented into production. What has helped us there is, again, to have standardization. So we have a very standardized approach for CI/CD, but also beyond, to have fast release cycles and have a simplified maintenance setup. And also before we go live, we have, we call it a go live review with our MLOps colleagues that are the people who are involved during the implementation phase, but also doing part of the maintenance and support work, that they are telling us, okay, your implementation is ready to go, or whether there are some parts still too customized and not following all the standards. And this is now saving us a lot of time in the run phase, because while in the past it was like every week there was an email, hey, this is not working, this is not working. With this standardized approach, first, we have much less of these support requests, but also second, it doesn't matter whether person A, B, or C is then taking up the support request. They know this is a standardized setup, so they can fix all, and it's not depending on the one person who has done the implementation before. Also, it helps to not just say, okay, we have now this machine learning model, it's in production, and we wait what is happening, but to have a regular model refinement. Either saying, for example, every week we train a new model based on the newest data, or in the field of Gen AI, that you refine the prompt based on the new data you have. So with that, you can make sure that not over time the performance is going worse and worse. We had this email classification task in the past project. It was even taken offline because the performance was after a while just not good enough anymore. But now we have this approach to train every week a new model, and the performance even going up because it knows up-to-date data and more data it can decide on. And finally, it is also important to keep a look at how it is really used in production. We had, for example, one project we implemented, gave to the project partner, they said, okay, cool, now we are using machine learning. After half a year, we found out, okay, it is there, but nobody is using it. So having proper monitoring, having regular feedback also from the users helps you to understand whether it is used, whether it's helpful, or whether maybe just small changes are needed to make it much more valuable for the users. With that, I am coming to the end, and I was giving you a lot or several best practices, lessons learned. In the end, it boils down to basically 3 principles I would like to remember as take-home messages. First, it is we saw from the ideation part to production phase that you need to stay closely aligned with your project partners. Because only when you're closely aligned, you develop what they need, and you can also gain a better understanding on their side, what is possible and what is not possible. The second point I'd like you to take home is, once you have standards, everything can become faster. You can deliver POCs faster, but you also can run better in production what you have there if you have these standards. And then it is easier to come from 5 use cases to 50 or 500 use cases than if you have one individual setup at the time. Like we also have seen in a previous presentation, that the standardization helps a lot. And finally, I think we cannot mention it often enough that this technology is evolving that fast that you always need to have in mind, I'm building now something, but what is maybe in half a year or a year? Could that be replaced already by just having GPT-5? Or is it something it can last longer? Usually you cannot predict it, so it helps that you say, okay, we built an 80% solution, have it in production, and then maybe in a year you spend an additional effort to adapt it to the new technology, instead of saying, okay, now we have built it, we move out, and here you go with your solution. That is all I want to share with you. Thank you for your attention, and happy to take your question later at the table.